Hello, this is Danielle Fowler presenting the evolution of American higher education. From past to present. Studying history provides us with a better understanding of why we have the systems in place that we do. So of course this applies to higher education, but it applies to so much more than that as well. Pretty much any system in our world today. Things like our legal system, our government, our economic structure, our social systems, even us as individuals, all of those things are shaped by their past, by major events in their history, by making choices that created a path to the present day. And so the best way to understand how someone or something got to the present day is to look back. And looking at the history of higher education has helped me personally understand quite a lot about the state of higher education today, seeing those major events that helped shape and form and mold higher education into what I do now on a daily basis has been really interesting for me. And so what we'll do in this presentation is look at a few different areas, a few aspects of higher education that have evolved over time. And then using that information of the evolution, we'll talk about what might happen in the future. First up, let's talk about structure and governance. Originally, American colleges were built from the Oxford and Cambridge model, but with one significant change, and that is that the governance was not focused on faculty, but instead a president and then an external board. And so you can kind of understand how over time faculty had this need to be heard or to have an organized voice. And so even today there are faculty senates, there are academic freedom protections. The American Association of University Professors was founded to give those faculty members a voice. And so you can see how the evolution came from a need of faculty needing a voice. Similarly, varied structures of higher education were developed to meet varied needs. So our history in American higher education began with the standard four-year college that awarded bachelor's degrees. But as that sector grew, there was a need for more PhD students in order to have more professors, to have more teachers at the four-year college. And so you saw an increase in universities with graduate schools. And then came along community colleges. I found the California master plan to be really interesting because you can see how they offered the community college as a resolution to a need, that there were lots of folks who wanted to go to college, but not all were prepared academically, and so therefore it was a great convenient way to satisfy that need. And then finally, in more recent years, we've seen a rise in the number of technical schools opening, as well as online colleges that meet the needs of working adults. And so the structure has certainly adapted over time. Next up, let's talk about diversity and access. We all know this was one of the obvious ways that higher education has changed. But just to summarize, originally higher education was exclusive to those white upper class young men from families of means. Well, slowly women and African Americans did gain access to higher education, but initially, of course, they were relegated to separate institutions. It took many years before co-education was finally successful. Another way that the diversity of the population within higher education changed was when the GI Bill was introduced. That meant that many more non-traditional students were getting into college life. It wasn't just that 18 to 22-year-old window anymore. It was a little bit more broad than that, which of course changed the demographics quite a lot. And so then higher education really essentially moved from an exclusive club to a mass product, and then eventually to universal access. I would say that today in America, we've pretty much accomplished universal access. We're still getting better and and improving that process, but where there's a will, there's a way here in America for higher education. And while the student demographics were changing, so were the faculty demographics. So faculty diversity followed the lead of student diversity. Where there were co-ed students, there were also co-ed faculty over time. Mission and campus culture. As we've already talked about, initially the college campus was exclusive to upperclassmen. It was to prepare them for life in politics, potentially sometimes in a profession, or to be a member of the clergy, but either way, it was an elitist system. And so that became a draw, actually, because it was seen as something exciting and a club to be a part of, which caused a pop culture fascination with college life. And of course, there was that desire for upward mobility. And those two things combined really drove the middle class to college. That pop culture fascination was supported by sports teams and traditions. Again, those things were very essential in creating what felt like a club to be a part of, that made people want to be a part of that club. Eventually, that mass appeal led to universal access. So as the demand grew, so did the access, even to lower class citizens. And so what we see today is we've transposed a really diverse and new campus culture onto that traditional system. So we still have those sports teams, we still have those traditions, but in a much more diverse and accepting and universal way. So it's we still feel pride in our college campus, in our athletic teams, in our mottos, in our alma mater songs. However, it has expanded to be much more including. Lastly, funding has certainly evolved over time in American higher education. Initially, American colleges were supported by private tuition, maybe religious denominations in several cases, and private donors. Well, over time, of course, just like the evolution of all other aspects of higher education, needs arose, opportunities arose, and programs were put in place to meet those needs or take advantage of those opportunities. Hence, corporate sponsorships for research, government grants and support, not only at the state level, but federal level as well. And then student financial aid in the form of individual grants, loans, and scholarships, and even very recently, free community college. So we've come a long way from those early days of that elitist, only those with money can come to college, to now there is lots of different sources for funding, and it's changing all the time. Now let's look to the future. By considering higher education's evolution up to now, to present day, we can use that information to make educated guesses about what is to come. These are my projections about the future of American higher education within those same areas that we've discussed the history of. First up, structure and governance. I feel that over time, in the very near future, we will continue to cater to stakeholders. Those stakeholders are, in my opinion, students, parents, and economic needs. I have seen in recent years that there is much more demand for results in terms of employment opportunities when students graduate. Students have expectations, as do their parents, about what sort of jobs they will land after college. And so I believe that in order to continue to satisfy the customer, we will continue to update and change our curriculums, our funding, all areas of governance and structure to better meet those needs. I also think that we will see increasing government oversight. I believe this because as we talk more about the next presidential election, for instance, there's lots of talk about making higher education free or forgiving student debt, that sort of thing. And so as the government becomes more involved in higher education, as I believe it will, I think that they will ask for more return on investment evidence. And so I think they will become much more involved in the operations of American higher education. As for diversity and access, I think that we will continue to see increased diversity, including internationally, just as we have for several years now. And I also think that we'll see increased access, especially in the way of free tuition, just as many community colleges now are free, as are technical colleges. I think we will see that grow again, just like I mentioned, as government becomes more involved. Mission and campus culture. One prediction that I have is that we will see a decline of Greek life as we know it anyway in its current form. And I say this because I keep reading articles about fraternities that are in trouble for sexual harassment or even worse, and lots of complaints about inclusion. And I think that Greek life will suffer because we are moving away from those exclusive clubs as a society and more openness and social responsibility. And so even though I'm certainly, I think Greek life has lots of positives, I'm afraid that we might see a decline in that culture on campus. I also think that we may see a decline in college athletics outside of top-level institutions. I think it's certainly possible that lower and mid-level institutions will start making cuts. Lots of schools out there pay for football programs that don't make any money and in fact cost quite a lot. And at some point, I think they will have to start asking the question of measuring that return on investment. And I also think that we'll see a shift in campus culture and mission because there will be an increase in the demand for technical education rather than the standard 4-year bachelor degree. As for funding, I predict, I could be totally wrong, I'm not an economist, but I predict that we may see tuition plateau due to supply and demand imbalance for that bachelor's degree. So I think that as students start questioning the need for a bachelor's degree, even more so than they already do, and start seeking technical education or community college education in its place, I think that enrollments will decline and therefore tuitions will have to be more competitive. Student loan forgiveness. I do think that will come to fruition in some way, in some form in the near future, maybe not right away, but certainly I think that has come to the forefront of conversation with our politicians. And then I think that free tuition options will continue to increase, potentially until states and or federal government fund 4-year colleges for free, potentially. I want to wrap up with this quote from Jose Rizal. Those who fail to look back to where they came from will not reach where they're going. This is true in all aspects of life, and I certainly think it's applicable to higher education in America today.